Good evening, everyone. I'm David Briner, Treasurer of the Philadelphia chapter of the Society of Architectural Historians, and I welcome you to tonight's program. Before we get started, if you are not a member or know someone who would like to be a member, please go to our website, philachaptersah.org, philachaptersah.org. You'll see information about past programs. You can see information about joining the chapter, and we would love to have you part of our group. Uh, and I also would like to put in a plug for our next program, which is happening on the evening of Tuesday, November 4th. Dr. Ann Kulikowski will be talking about serpentine stone, and that program will also be at 7 p.m. So we hope to see you then. Uh, I will turn over the mic now to my colleague, Kevin Block.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, David. We are very excited tonight to welcome the 2025 George Tatum Fellow, Chenchen Yan from Princeton University. As she may or may not know, we are celebrating George Tatum, another Princeton PhD, also Princeton undergrad, esteemed Victorianist, and another scholar of Philadelphia architecture. So it's really quite fitting. We're excited to have you tonight talk about the Chinese Rotunda. I'm sure you're going to do a great job. And if you don't mind, I'm going to plug very quickly via sharing my screen. Our next round, the Tatum Fellowship is open again, and you can see how exciting Mexico City awaits you. So please all take a screenshot or follow up with the Philadelphia chapter. We've increased the fellowship amount to support participation in this conference. It's international and they're always great, but this one will surely be special, especially for anyone who happens to be studying this area of the world. So please avail yourself of the opportunity if you're local. If you want to find out more, you can visit the Philadelphia chapter of the Society of Architectural Historians website to learn about eligibility. So, who is our guest? Chenchen Yan is a PhD candidate in history and theory of architecture at Princeton University. Her dissertation explores processes of becoming Chinese, of objects that were introduced into Western knowledge systems around the turn of the 20th century and how these objects reshaped the spaces in which they were cataloged, stored, and displayed. Her work has been supported by the Society of Architectural Historians, including our chapter now, the Canadian Center for Architecture, and the Arnold Arboretum of Harvard University, among others. So if everyone can give a virtual round of applause to Chenchen, and do be mindful of the chat feature, which is open, and leave questions after you speak, Chenchen. Hopefully you can stick around and we can answer some questions and have a nice discussion. So take it away. Thank you very much.
Can I share my screen now? Okay, well, let's do this. Slideshow. Okay, so hello everyone, and thank you so much, Kevin, for your kind introduction. Why is this advancing on itself? Maybe I should, here we go. Thank you, Kevin, for your kind introduction. Can everybody hear me well?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Great, amazing. And I also just want to take a moment to thank everyone on the board for your generous support and the wonderful opportunity to travel to Atlanta back in May. It was great to attend the conference and also see the buildings of John Portman in person. And it is a great honor to present my work here with you all, and I look forward to a stimulating discussion afterwards. So as you can see from my title, my presentation today takes its point of departure from the so-called Chinese Rotunda, which I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. So officially named Harrison Rotunda after the University of Pennsylvania provost and chairman of the museum board, Charles Harrison. It is one of the most spectacular spaces in the Penn Museum, with its monumental self-supporting dome, which spans 90 feet in diameter and 90 feet in height. And as you can see from this photo taken at the opening exhibition in 1915, from the very beginning, it was already used to display Chinese objects. And likewise, to this day, it showcases some of the most impressive collections of Chinese art in the West, including a 94-pound rock crystal ball said to have belonged to the Empress Dowager Cixi, two panels of relief depicting horses of the Emperor Taizong, two Qing Dynasty cloisonné lines. I don't know if you can see it in this picture. The lines are here. And of course, countless pieces of Buddhist sculpture. So it is often said that the nickname Chinese Rotunda originated from the extensive Chinese collections of the museum. But this begs the question, how did the museum come to acquire such a substantial collection of Chinese art? Visiting the Penn Museum today, one will be surprised to realize that the Penn Museum was in fact founded not as an art museum, but as a museum of archaeology and paleontology. In 1987, Provost William Pepper persuaded the university trustees to fund an expedition to the ancient site of Nippur, present-day Iraq, in exchange for the ownership of the artifacts from the expedition, which then sets in motion the establishment of the museum. And it was then decided that the university library, which was designed by no other than Frank Furness, would house artifacts from the expedition. So by late 1889, the work of organizing and setting up the museum and building up its collection was very well underway, but Furness Library building was not yet completed. So as a result, the third floor of College Hall, which you can see on right next to the library building here, was temporarily converted into a museum, and it was presented to the public as the Museum of Archaeology and Paleontology on December 13 in 1889. It is important to note that the term archaeology at the time was specifically understood as the past history of human civilization from an evolutionary perspective. During his provostship, Pepper paid special attention to ethnology and archaeology and developed a major graduate program in conjunction with the museum. Pepper, in particular, referred to the museum as a quote, a great ethnological museum. And evolution was indeed the concept that integrated archaeology, ethnology, and paleontology. Within such an inclusive program, the study of the primitive man had its place alongside investigations of the history of Western civilization. So, Pepper regarded public instruction as the primary function of a museum, which he envisioned as a vast means of instruction in anthropology and not a mere collection of curiosities. Popular lectures at the museum constituted a movement of the first importance, not only in the interest of the museum, but of the entire subject of archaeology in the community. So, although the museum existed in an academic context, Pepper oriented the museum toward the Philadelphia scientific and intellectual community at large. So, in practice, and in addition, in practice, a significant factor that determined the museum's focus on popular instruction as opposed to academic research was that greater public appeal would bring more readily available funds to support more expeditions. And in consequence, early museum collections stressed classical and Near Eastern archaeology, which excited great public interest. And as more collections began to arrive, the museum was relocated in 1890 to the newly erected University Library. And it is fascinating that this iconic furnace building was designed as a library and a museum at the same time. So, in the literature on Frank Furness, perhaps one of the most famous architects of Philadelphia, the library has been celebrated for its rational and efficient planning. The building's distinct three sections, a grand reading room, side and rear service area, and a theoretically expendable shed for books, more on that later, were designed to make the library an information processing machine. Designed in collaboration, so as you can see here, the reading room, um, the service area, and this is supposedly expendable book stack. So it was designed in collaboration with leading library experts of the day, including Justin Windsor, librarian of Harvard, and Melville Dewey, librarian of Columbia and inventor of the Dewey Decimal System. The building clearly articulates its different functional components in audacious, irregular, and asymmetrical form. The south book stack wing was expressed as, let's go back to this, as a glass and iron silica, and the reading room was modeled on the semicircular apse of the cathedral, and but it was facing north and not west, so to provide indirect light. And along its base, a ring of private study spaces, each dedicated to a particular subject of study, replaced the side chapels of a cathedral which would have been in place. And a massive stair tower was positioned like a transept, but it was purposefully detached from the library to separate the traffic to the upstairs spaces, which included a lecture hall and the museum space here, as you can see. Um, and as I mentioned, the book stack wing was designed to be expanded. It was particularly designed as modular, and it means that it could be as long or as short as the university required, and it was an answer to the chronic problem of library design. And today, one might consider this idea of expendable library as idiosyncratic, but back in the day, it was an exciting concept. Provost Pepper boasted in his annual report that, well, the book stack emits of indefinite extension, end of quote. And the famous newspaper editor and founding director of the Columbia School of Journalism, Talcott Williams, also remarked that the plan of the stack emits of indefinite extension in his 1888 article in the Library Journal. And by the way, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I can't help but mention that as a side note, as historian Michael Lewis has brilliantly pointed out, the idea of the indefinitely expendable book stack was in fact based on the typology of the train shack. Given that Furness was deeply involved in railroad architecture and that both the train depot and the library require spaces to be brightly lit and fireproof, it makes sense that there was a tight connection between the two typologies. So back to the library. So while the library was planned with anticipation of future expansion, space for the museum was not expendable at all. So this is just an image of the exhibition at the time. And while the independent nature of the tower prevented the sound of footsteps from penetrating the main reading room, the museum artifacts upstairs began to take over unexpectedly but expediently spaces such as this staircase and corridors, as you can see in this photo. And this plethora of artifacts, from photographs to prints lining up on the stair railings, scrolls of Chinese calligraphy hanging from upstairs, cabinets filled with ceramics and other objects, alongside a set of European armor, as you can see here, was an overflow from the museum upstairs. Artifacts of various provenances were densely packed together and did not seem to follow any apparent organizational principle, forming a stark contrast to the functional, rationally planned spaces of the library on the first floor. So, as this photograph shows, the new building was urgently needed to house artifacts that the museum was rapidly accumulating. Around the same time, the city of Philadelphia began to expand westward. The University of Pennsylvania participated in this urban expansion by relocating from Center City to the other side of Schuylkill River. In 1894, Pepper obtained a piece of 9-acre land from the city of Philadelphia and a considerable sum from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to erect a new building for the museum, on the condition that it would be open to the public at no charge. And it remained so until 1987, and it's no longer the case today, unfortunately. A new name, Free Museum of Science and Art, was subsequently adopted. Indeed, built on the West Bank between the university and the city, the museum served as a symbolic bridge between two. Designed by a team of local firms, Wilson Eyre, Cope, Storson, Frank Meyer, Day, and Brothers, the master plan of the new museum shows a complex of buildings and wings. In this web-like network of buildings, the three central rotundas will be devoted to the, quote, ancient civilizations of Greece and Rome, Egypt, and Mesopotamia, flanked by courtyard buildings dedicated to the quote, traditional cultures of America, Asia, Africa, and Oceania. As a response to the problem of museum taxonomy and organization, this plan shows a diagrammatic thinking that not only proposed a structure of organizing artifacts, but also represented an evolutionary theory of art and architecture based on, of course, the geographical and cultural categories of civilization. Indeed, the new museum building cannot be seen as, indeed, the new museum building can be seen as a part of a larger development in the history of American anthropology known as the museum period, when anthropology in the US was largely collection-based, object-centered, and institutionally housed in natural history and ethnographic museums rather than in academic departments. During this time, anthropologists, for example, perhaps most famously, Franz Boas, were often curators, field collectors, or museum directors, and much of the discipline's intellectual formation was tied to the organization, classification, and display of material culture. George Stocking and others have observed that museums lay at the center of the political economy of anthropological research. In the second half of the 19th century, museums may have literally created anthropology by helping to consolidate the mid-19th century endeavors of linguistics, ethnology, and archaeology under the same terminological umbrella and under the same institutional roof. So at the Penn Museum, which took up again an area of 9 acres, was also planned to be built wing by wing. In fact, only the shaded area you can in this drawing was completed when the museum opened in 1899. In this sense, the museum, just like Furness's library, was designed to be expendable too. Nowhere, however, was the Chinese Rotunda to be found in this plan. When the new museum opened its door in 1989, sorry, 1899, it was arranged as like a microcosm of the scheme planned for the entire complex. On the upper floor, the three main galleries um, substituted for the planned rotundas by exhibiting the Greco-Roman, Egyptian, and Mesopotamian collections. And on the lower floor, artifacts of Asia, Africa, Oceania, and America were exhibited, um, substituting for the courtyard buildings that were to be constructed. And by the way, we can see electric lighting here as well. So, in fact, the museum was the first fully electric public buildings in the city of Philadelphia. Um, so the expansion theme proposed by the 1896 master plan meant that every time the museum built a new wing, it would at least have to reorganize all its collections. And in fact, as soon as the first planned expansion took place, the historical organizational scheme was completely disrupted and rendered meaningless. So in 1915, the University Museum completed its first expansion as planned, the Harrison Rotunda, as you can see here, which was again named after the university provost at the time. And in fact, it was the one of the so it was one of the three original central rotundas in the original plan, as you can see here. And it was the first, actually, the only rotunda built. And as we all know, it quickly became known as the Chinese Rotunda. There was, in fact, of course, nothing really Chinese about the rotunda itself. Constructed by the Guastavino engineering firm, the monumental self-supporting dome in the upper and lower chambers were celebrated as a feat of engineering. On the upper level, the 90-foot diameter and 90-foot height dome was topped by a glass lantern, and on the lower level, the auditorium provides a pillar-free space with 800 unobstructed view seats, which was only made possible by Guastavino's innovative vaulting technique using interlocking terracotta tiles and layers of mortar to form a thin skin that follows the curve of the ceiling. So the name of Guastavino might not be very well known, but the father and son, Raphael Guastavino, were subcontractors for famous architects like Hunt or McCain, and White, and their structures were literally everywhere. Inspired by Chicago's fire of 1871, Raphael the Senior developed a proprietary tile vault system to withstand flames, which made their company called Guastavino Fireproof Construction Company, the indispensable builder of the Gilded Age. In addition to the Penn Museum, Guastavino's also worked on Grand Central Station, Carnegie Hall, Ellis Island, Pennsylvania Station, Boston Library, the Boston Public Library, Riverside Church, and the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. And of course, they also help to build homes for the country's richest families, like the Vanderbilts, Morgans, Astors, Rockefellers, and Mellons. So once again, if the museum was understood as a teaching institution to develop the modern discipline of anthropology, why did the museum collect Chinese art without having any research staff and faculty specialized in China at the time? And how did it acquire its extensive collections without carrying any expeditions to China? When the Harrison Rotunda opened in 1915, an exhibition featuring 335 Chinese artifacts worth over 1 million alongside European tapestries and the so-called Oriental rugs um, were, uh, were loaned for the occasion. Museum director George Byron Gordon took the opportunity to ask patrons to purchase specific items displayed there as you can see in the picture, for permanent collection for the museum. In this case, in the Chinese Rotunda, the museum literally became an art market. So trained as an archaeologist, George Byron Gordon graduated from Harvard in 1894 and became the museum director in 1910. Over the course of his directorship, Gordon oversaw the largest expansion in the history of the museum, including the Harrison Rotunda in 1915, the Cox Memorial Egyptian Wing in 1924, and the Administrative Wing in 1929, just before the Great Depression. Because of his urgent interest in Chinese culture, his tenure was even characterized as the museum's Chinese period. And under his direction, the museum's acquisition, specifically in the area of Chinese collections, gave it an unparalleled position in Europe and America. While knowing little about Chinese art, Gordon began collecting in 1913 with the acquisition of a group of small bronzes, blue and white porcelains, and potteries. By 1916, Gordon had developed the Chinese holdings of the museum and chose to display them in a newly erected Harrison Rotunda, which we all know now became known as the Chinese Rotunda. Yeah, where did all these artifacts come from, and how did they end up in the museum? Take as an example one of Gordon's most famous acquisitions, two stone relief panels of horses commissioned by Emperor Tang, founder of the Tang Dynasty, for his mausoleum. This purchase would not have been possible without a decade-long relationship between Gordon and the infamous art dealer C.T. Lu. Their correspondence suggests the shared interest in cultivating a business and personal relationship. In a postcard from C.T. Lu dated July 28, 1917, Lu asks rhetorically, quote, "How would you compare this hall?" Meaning referring to the Temple of Heaven in Beijing, to that of Dr. Harrison, referring to the Harrison Rotunda. I guess this is like a reference to the previous correspondence where Gordon compared the Chinese Rotunda to the Temple of Heaven here. And it thus seems that Gordon had used the name Chinese Rotunda specifically to develop a rapport with Lu, who played a predominant role in the museum's acquisitions of Chinese art. In fact, according to Lu, he contributed to the opening of the Harrison Rotunda in 1915, which he described as a great revelation to the public. Likewise, the purchase of the two stone relief panels followed exactly the same tactic as used in the opening exhibition in the Chinese Rotunda. In 1918, Lu lent the panels to the museum to help to rally support from benefactors to acquire the objects. And sure enough, in 1920, Aldrich Johnson, the founder of the Victor Talking Machine Company and one of the most reliable patrons of the museum, paid $125,000 for the reliefs and presented them to the museum. So Who was C.T. Lu? C.T. Lu was one of the earliest and most important Chinese art dealers in the first half of the 20th century. Born into a scholarly family in 1880, Lu schooled in Shanghai and at the age of 20 went to Paris in the hope of entering foreign trade. In 1902, with Zhang Jingliang, a wealthy commercial attaché to the Qing minister in France, Lu established a private trading company for the sale of curios, tea, and silk. Because of his donation to, allegedly, to the revolutionary cause of the Sun Yat-sen's Xinhai Revolution, which overthrew the Qing dynasty and ended the imperial history of China in 1911, Lu and his partner Zhang had privileged access to high-quality antiquities, especially those from the Qing imperial collections. So historians think. In any case, in 1908, Lu founded an antique firm under the name Lai Yuan Company in Paris and expanded his business into America after Europe entered World War I. Working between Europe and the United States, Lu was instrumental in introducing new aesthetic objects like stone sculpture and acquiring objects for many prestigious private and institutional collections, including those of J.P. Morgan, the Rockefellers, Charles Long Freer, Samuel Peters, Alfred Pillsbury, and Henry Clay Frick, among others. Understanding the importance of publicity and reputation to the value of his commodities, Lu regularly organized exhibitions to showcase his inventory and commissioned scholarly publications in tandem with his sale exhibitions. A series of catalogs written by leading experts were published, including Paul Pelliot and Bertolt Laufer, and Michael Rostsev, as you can see here. Despite their commercial purpose, these publications contributed to the formation of the academic studies of Chinese art, language, and culture in American universities. And to display his collections more spectacularly, Lu built a new gallery in Paris on the Rue de Courcelles, originally constructed as Hôtel Particulier in the French Louis Philippe style. The six-story building was purchased in 1925 and was transformed into an Orientalist-style pagoda, quote-unquote pagoda, and as it came to be called, with the help of architect Fernand Bloch. And its red exterior, typically Chinese architectural elements such as the tile eaves, decorative windows, and rooftop gurgoyles stand out among the monotone Haussmannian buildings surrounding it. The building functioned as the gallery C.T. Lu and its sumptuously decorated, extravagant interior. And they're all themed. There's they're all themed in different ways, resembling period rooms that were then very popular in the United States. These interiors showcase artifacts in an immersive, entertaining, and spectacular way. And of course, C.T. Lu was only one of the whole generation of art dealers who took advantage of the unprecedented social and political situations in early 20th century China. Indeed, historians have described the first 3 decades of the 20th century as the golden age of Chinese art collecting, bookended by the disintegration of Imperial China in 1911 and the onset of the Great Depression in the US. And it was a time when imperial collections were stolen or sacked, when Chinese aristocrats had to sell their family heirlooms, when archaeological expeditions yielded an abundance of artifacts, and when treasures from temples and pilgrimage sites were placed on the market. As a crucial agent who adeptly navigated the international network that produced the scores of Chinese art in America, Liu worked across national and cultural borders and put artifacts in motion around the world. It was in and through the circulation that these artifacts acquired their meaning in different contexts and reshaped the practices of museum organization and display. So, oh, sorry, as not yet. As a quintessential product of the Gilded Age, the Penn Museum displayed and attracted new wealth by funneling it into its monumental buildings filled with not only European masters and archaeological treasures, but also exotic artifacts that allowed the museum director, Gordon, to strategically use museum resources to pay salaries to grow his academic program of anthropology. So to conclude, the Art-Anthropology Imbroglios at the Penn Museum arose not only from the fact that Chinese objects continue to often straddle the boundaries between art and anthropology, between Orientalist, curios, naturalist specimens, or ethnographic artifacts, but it also comes from the largely forgotten affinities between the art market, the museum, and the emerging academic discipline of anthropology. And lastly, to close my presentation, I would like to end with another instance of becoming Chinese, and it also happened to be related to Frank Furness. So the Broad Street station this is the Broad Street station of the Pennsylvania Railroad in Philadelphia. Established in 1852, the Pennsylvania Railroad played, of course, as we all know, played a substantial role in Philadelphia's development into an industrial center of manufacturing. And opened in 1881, Broad Street Station was the railroad company's downtown terminal connected with a large viaduct that elevated the tracks and allowed trains to reach the center of the city above the street, eliminating grading crossings, and of course, with that, all the dirt and filth and danger that had been associated with running railroads within urban neighborhoods. So as a result, more than 200 buildings were razed, and many streets over 10 blocks had to go under the viaduct through dark and damp tunnels, which were at some places more than a city block long, as you can see here. So between 1892 and 1883, when Frank Furness dramatically expanded the station, adding a 10-story office building, the viaduct was once again widened, featuring a huge train shed that covered 16 tracks. And then at some point in the early decades of the 20th century, the viaduct became the so-called Chinese Wall of Philadelphia, alluding to, so this is the so-called Chinese Wall, alluding to the Great Wall of China. And according to the popular narrative, it was partly because it effectively separated the neighborhoods, and partly because it took up blocks of land that were becoming increasingly valuable real estate. And I should have a news article, showing the name Chinese Wall of Philadelphia. So this is another question that I am asking. What kind of assumptions about Chineseness led to the becoming Chinese of this monumental structure, which is also related to Frank Furness and railroad architecture in some way? And it was also considered as a technological feat. And what historical circumstances and cultural submission made it possible for the viaduct to become Chinese, or the Chinese Wall? And this is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention. Yes. Should I stop sharing?
Yes, thank you. Actually, thank you, Chenchen. Stay sharing in case anyone has a question and wants to refer back to your presentation. There's the Q&A that's open. If anyone has a question, there are some attendees who know much more about this than I do, but just to ask the first question, can you speak a little bit about just this or the origins of this particular part of your larger project? Did you first, I was particularly interested in C.T. Liu. I did not know about that figure before. So when you got to him, I was very interested. Do you know about him before you turned your attention to the museum, or was it the other way around?
I say, actually, surprisingly, the origin of this research project is really Frank Furness. So I was taking a seminar on Frank Furness, and of course you have to read about his library design. And then I found this image of a lot of the overflowing collections from the upstairs, which I showed in my presentation. And I was just really surprised that there was very little mentioning of the museum space on the second floor of the library. Most of the literature, of course, focuses on the design of the library itself and how it was expendable and its connection with the Dewey Decimal System, et cetera, et cetera. So that was really the initial point of interest for me. And then I realized that there's this whole history behind the history of the development of the Penn Museum. And that led me to CT Lu. Yeah, and then that basically started my entire dissertation.
Thank you.
Chen, I have a question about the original design of the museum, which was phenomenally complex and large. And I'm wondering if you have anything else that you might say about it, given that just a small fraction of it was actually built. And did you find any information about the expectations about how quickly it would be built or so forth?
I haven't. This is just my speculation and not based on empirical evidence, but my guess would be that it was all about money. They probably didn't have enough funds to finish to complete everything in the original plan. So I guess the scheme was just to build as they secure more fund from either private donors or public um, sources. And that's also where the Chinese collection came into the picture because that was used exactly as a method of fundraising.
We're just waiting in case there are any additional questions in the Q&A. Of course, I have a couple more if I can ask them. One would be just, I don't have personally a good sense of the historic context in terms of collecting. I think the term you used was curios, right? Chinese curios. I don't even know if they categorize it in other ways in other American institutions. I'm somewhat familiar with Metropolitan Museum of Art, but in broad strokes, can you maybe put the Penn Museum in perspective? Because it seems like it has this curious history. It's maybe a smaller collection, but maybe it's revealing something important still, in terms of this larger trend.
Yeah, the term curio um, I think it can be it's connected with this long history of chinoiserie, which of course can be traced as early as the 17th century, or even some historians would say the 16th century, when the Europeans started to um, develop this taste for Chinese decorations and artifacts. And I mean, of course, it's not a Chinese style, it's the European imitation of Chinese art. And some people would think that it's a design movement. But of course, for the Europeans, they couldn't, there's no sense of authenticity. There's no distinction between authentic Chinese art and chinoiserie objects. Um, and of course, it was very exoticized, and curios was just and of course, like given the colonial context in late 19th century and early 20th century, it was often considered as souvenirs for colonial officers, and considered as a form of imperial possession as well. Um, and another important context might be the World's Fair, of course. Like in 1876, the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia. There was also a Chinese exhibition, or it's not a pavilion. Yeah, it's some kind of like exhibition. Um, and it was it was basically export some trade companies organized the exhibition, and used it was just like an occasion to sell more um, export art objects. Um, but I guess it's also not uniquely Chinese. It was curio as a term was also applied to other non-Western cultures as well.
A placeholder, something like until there's maybe more of an intellectual infrastructure there to make sense of these types of objects and interpret them. So we have one, it's a comment, but you can still respond to it. It's interesting. I think it speaks to maybe the intellectual history that you're suggesting. You ended on the Chinese wall, which
Yeah.
maybe speaks to some relationship to social history or even local cultural history and vernacular expressions. But this is a comment about maybe the academic consequences of this kind of space. So Pierre says Penn later had a really strong department in Oriental studies, especially Asian history, art, and languages. Maybe the museum encouraged this area of study. I took an amazing course in Chinese art from Shulier Kam in 1968. So do you have a sense of maybe the effects of this museum space on the university?
Yeah, I think so. One of my arguments is that although right now we think of the so-called area studies or Oriental studies, um, um, which are often considered as a product of post-war um, competition between the U.S. and the socialist sector. Like because you have to know your enemy, so you started to study the languages and cultures of the other culture, and that's how the area studies came to be. But I think in my research I found that actually in the interwar period there were already a lot of interests in Asian cultures, precisely driven by this like the influx or the desire to display wealth through collecting non-Western art, particularly Chinese objects. And there is a very intimate connection between art collecting and the establishment of the academic discipline of Chinese art. And I think that connection can be more um, clearly seen in the museum at Harvard, which was so the figure of Landon Warner famously was a curator at the Fogg Museum of Harvard University, and he also trained a whole generation of historian of Chinese art and architecture as well. So he is a figure that tied the museum to the academic program.
David, any
I'm
thoughts or questions?
I'm
Anyone
hoping
else in?
hoping someone else from our audience will have another question. Don't be shy.
I mean, I guess maybe from a Philadelphia architecture
Yeah,
story,
please.
right? Since that's the venue, many of us are familiar. Um, an event like 1876, the Centennial Exposition, was there an was that really momentous event for the study appreciation of Chinese art even locally? I mean, do you find that in some of the archival research that a lot of these Philadelphia, let's say, railroad elite or whatever the new wealth was at that time, that fascination for Chinese art was stimulated by those moments in the sense that we always hear about, Frank Lloyd Wright and, um, you know, Asian collecting Asian, um, well, first
Prince.
he was a trader himself, manuscripts, but also just exposure to Asian architecture broadly, Japanese architecture more particularly.
Yeah, Philadelphia is really a very unique context for me. Although I guess Gilded Age museums can be found in other cities like Boston, uh, Washington, D.C., and New York City as well, but there's really something particular about Philadelphia that I found really interesting. Maybe it's the railroad industry, its connection to the West, perhaps the and of course just like in a very material term, a lot of the Chinese objects came to the US through they would be shipped from East Asia to San Francisco first, and then they would be put on to the train and then shipped to Philadelphia. And that's usually the infrastructural route that these objects took. So I think the it's very interesting here. And of course, and the other important museum in Philadelphia, the Pennsylvania, right, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, um, is it was literally founded upon the Centennial Exposition. A lot of the exhibits were kept by the museum and formed the initial the I guess the first collection of the museum as well. And the Philadelphia Museum of Art is another important case study in my research as well.
Well, is this leading up to a larger book that we have to look forward to?
I hope one day.
Sounds like a very interesting topic. Um, well, seeing no more comments or questions, I'd like to commend you on such an interesting topic and clear presentation. really interesting images. I'm glad that you were able to include those in your presentation. And I'll give Kevin a last opportunity to say something if he has it.
Well, I mean, there's one more question that came in late, which I'm happy to pose,
Great, please
and
do.
then I can thank you one more time. But in any case, this is from Audrey Meyer, and it's again circling back to that term that you began to address at the very beginning. When discussing the early design, you mentioned that they focused on archaeology and using terms as, quote, curiosities. As you studied the changes and expansions of the museum, did you see a change of terminology of objects? And I don't know if she actually means changes in expansion architecturally of the museum. That's kind of an interesting thought, that architecture in relation to words. But maybe I'm injecting myself too much into this. So take it however you'd like.
So if I understand your question correctly, I think you're interested in the institutional framework that might have determined whether an object was categorized as a curiosity or um, a specimen or an ethnographic object, for example. And absolutely, I think so. If you look at if you think of the image of the overflowing collection in the staircase, um, with all, objects from different cultures and different provenances juxtaposed all together, they can be easily considered as curiosities. But once you put them in a taxonomically organized museum with systematic cataloging, they became ethnographic objects. So it's more about the system of knowledge and organization around it that framed our understanding of these objects, I think.
Well said. Yes, that was very clear. I think that's a great place to end on. So, on behalf of the whole chapter, Chen, we really thank you. We hope you had a great experience in Atlanta. You're still working away at this, so you can do it. Finish up, keep writing, and join us sometime in the future so that we can learn where this is going as a project.
Okay. Are you going to the
Also,
next year?
I hope so, but I can't apply to the Tatum Fellowship, unfortunately. I hope to go. But do share, if you don't mind. I'll just do a shameless plug, the announcement to any of your friends and colleagues who are certainly eligible to apply, because it's a great opportunity. We love to learn about their work this time next year as well. David, I don't know if you want to close us out.
Sure. Well, just to confirm with Chen that I'll be in touch with her after the conclusion of this event, and I, I'll repeat what Andrew said on behalf of the chapter. Thank you so much. Hope to see
Thank
everybody
you.
next month for the next event.
Thank you both, Kevin and David, and thank you everyone for coming.
Good night.
Good night.